think Facebook in particular is handling the latest situation? Obviously, we've seen a lot of, potentially positive discourse as these groups have allowed people to discuss these things, but groups exploding as well over differences in views.
Well, look, we're at a moment at which political organization from all points of view is more enabled, more empowered than ever. And Facebook is a big part of that, right? Facebook is a great way, perhaps the best we've ever had, to find like-minded people and motivate them to take some sort of action. And so we can see that when people organize protests in the streets right now, they're more often than not using Facebook to find people to join them and rolling out their plans on Facebook. It's extremely easy. The Facebook worked the same way with the Women's March in early 2017, and it's worked for groups both left and right over the years. Facebook is an amazing tool for motivation, but democracies need more than motivation. Democracies need deliberation as well. Facebook really undermines deliberation. It filters us, it segments us, it also riles us up, right? The sorts of material that gets amplified on Facebook tend to favor strong emotions. Emotions can be anger, or they can be joy, right? It can be baby pictures and puppy pictures. It can also be hate speech or calls to genocide or harassment. And so it's really the extreme content that gets amplified on Facebook. Now, this is a really intense moment for all of us, but it's a really intense moment for Facebook. Facebook is dealing with the prospects of the 2020 election in the United States. We're still reeling after its influence on the 2016 election. Facebook is facing a barrage of bad information being put out there about COVID-19. Facebook groups devoted to vaccine denial, Facebook groups devoted to all sorts of myths and lies about COVID. And in addition, the president of the United States has been distributing information that's false and harmful about COVID-19. So Facebook and Twitter and YouTube have all been on their guard all year, knowing that these two big phenomena are going to challenge everything they do and everything they believe about themselves. And now along come these protests against police brutality, and it brings it up to another level.
So, meantime, you see Twitter taking, sort of an opposite stance here. Obviously, they took action on the president's tweet suggesting that looters be shot. They've got new rules they're introducing now that you must open articles before you can retweet them, or they will suggest that you do, because, oftentimes we're seeing folks retweeting articles they haven't even read. That causes discourse and sometimes controversial discourse. I mean, what do you think? Let's start with Facebook. What could Facebook be doing better? Or, as some folks have said, has the monster already been created? Is the genie already out of the bottle?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, Facebook is too big to fix right now. Facebook has 2.5 billion users around the world, constantly posting in more than 100 languages. That's a system that's too big to govern. It's a system where it doesn't matter how good your artificial intelligence is, doesn't matter how many humans you hire to filter through all of the hate speech and the threats to rape and the threats to kill. You just can't catch it all. You can't catch all the live moments. So it's not that Facebook is a lost cause, but every effort that Facebook makes internally to try to clean itself up is cosmetic, right? It doesn't really get to the heart of the problem. Twitter's been interesting. Twitter is a lot smaller. Instead of 2.5 billion users like Facebook has, Twitter has 330 million users, and they're largely concentrated in North America and Western Europe. So Twitter has been willing to experiment. Also, the folks who run Twitter are a lot less sort of bullheaded than Mark Zuckerberg is, a lot less ideologically committed. So they're experimenting with a lot of different ways of handling the current mix of crises. Twitter has, as you said, put a sort of fact check link underneath one of Trump's tweets that incited him and sent him off in a big tizzy. But it was pretty useless and harmless. I mean, who's going to click on that thing anyway? I didn't really understand the point of that. But again, it was an experiment. See how many people click on that to find the truth about, for instance, mail-in voting and the prospects for fraud, right? Because we do actually have a record on that. And then the next tweet that Twitter interfered with or intervened about was a fairly dangerous call for state violence by the president. And he was explicitly violating the rules that Twitter expects us all to follow. You and I can't call for violence against anybody on Twitter, or our accounts will be canceled almost immediately. But of course, there are different rules for world leaders and different rules for Trump. So they covered one of the tweets, right? Twitter covered one of the tweets that called for state violence, and then insisted that if you want to see the tweet, you have to click through. And to do that, of course, you have to read that this tweet violates Twitter's policies. Then once you got through there, Twitter forbade anyone from commenting on it or liking it. You could retweet it, but to retweet it, the next person would still see that cover. So it was a pretty clever way of handling one particular tweet. It hasn't really been repeated. And again, Twitter's sort of experimenting with a variety of different ways to handle not just Trump's problems, but all sorts of shenanigans going on Twitter, because we know that Twitter, like Facebook, will be a platform for all sorts of disinformation and misinformation, not just about COVID, but about the election coming up in November.
Talking about that, we can assume that President Trump is going to test the waters and figure out where these companies are going to try to draw the line, potentially over and over again as we lead into the election. I mean, how do these companies manage that? And, you know, does that then create even more sort of flashpoints and distraction from the actual issues, you know, the health crisis we're in, an economic crisis, a social crisis?
I mean, what you're describing is a whirlpool of expression. It's a cacophony. We're living in a cacophony already, right? Our phones are buzzing and beeping. We each have 3 or 4 different communication applications open on our desktops at any given time. It's madness right now, trying to make sense of the world. On top of that, we have world leaders like Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil and Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines and Narendra Modi in India and Donald Trump in the United States, who take advantage of this environment by flooding our information ecosystem with more stimuli, more distractions, more extremism, knowing that the harder it is for us to hold a coherent thought, the harder it is for us to mount a coherent argument for or against any policy, for or against any movement. And, you know, that ultimately undermines democracy in a pretty serious way, although an indirect way. It limits our ability as citizens to think seriously like grown-ups about serious issues, right? We're basically, chasing the latest tweet, chasing the latest wacky thing that comes out of the White House, and that just doesn't do anybody any good, right? It's, because there are some serious things going on, but it's almost impossible to get through a day without being totally waylaid. And Facebook is the most pervasive media system the world has ever seen. No one has ever lived at a time where you could communicate with this many people this easily. And so it is contributing directly to the cacophony. It's designed to amplify strong emotions. And so it's contributing to and amplifying cacophony.